aspects to this case, so many facets that you can explore that just don't make sense, or they do make sense, and you can't do anything with them. Jana Davis did a fantastic job. She was a reporter for KFOR down there, Channel 4 TV television news, and she was working on the Middle Eastern connections, all of the different people involved that she had, surveillance pictures of. She had their names. She knew where they came from, who they worked for, the whole bit. And she got depositions, she got everything, and she couldn't give it to the FBI. She couldn't make the Justice Department even take all the evidence that she collected in this case. I give her a lot of credit for doing a lot of work on this, and she ended up losing her job over it. She did such a great job that her station was bought out, and she was fired just to shut her up. But going back to the beginning of this, Charles Key's objective in it, and especially the folks that put this documentary together, the thrust of it, the hook is did the government have foreknowledge of this in advance? Could it have been stopped? Was it a sting operation gone awry? Who in the government knew? How much did they know? When did they know it? And how far in advance did they know it? And when you start getting to those aspects of the film, you can see all of the stuff that was turned up, or at least a lot of it. There's just so much out there. I've got, when I retired, I had 5 boxes of files on just this case that went all kinds of different directions. So the documentary itself, which I was glad to help with, exposes so much that went on that was not in the mainstream news. In fact, I was assigned the case on the 3rd day, on Friday of that week. It happened on a Wednesday, the 19th of April, 1995. And Friday afternoon, I was asked by the local office of the FBI through our chief's office if I could help them, because as an investigative journalist, besides being a police officer, I had a lot of contacts that they didn't have. And because they didn't have those contacts and couldn't get those contacts or even buy those contacts, they wanted me to see what I could find out about the case, especially who was McVeigh, has he ever been to Oklahoma? If so, where's he been? Who does he talk to? And so on and so forth. But it got bigger than that. I'm kind of like a pit bull. Once I get on a case, I'm going to let go of it. Mm-hmm. And I started just going different directions all over the country with this case and finding out all kinds of things, and ended up linking up with other investigative journalists and other police officers around the country and so on and so forth. And we started turning up stuff, and I kept turning in all these reports, and they just kind of disappeared into a black hole. It just got more bizarre and more bizarre. Well, in July of that year, I went out to California to visit my father. There was no news in California about the Oklahoma City bombing. There was no news out of state about the Oklahoma City bombing or the investigation. Sure, there was news the day it happened and maybe 1 or 2 days after that, and then it was like a blackout across the country. Unless somebody was going to trial, or unless somebody had just been arrested, or the elusive John Doe 2 that they said was this Todd Bunning who rented a Ryder truck the day ahead of time, and it really wasn't him, so there really wasn't a John Doe 2, right, which was all hogwash. Unless it was something like that, nothing hit the news. So the rest of the country it was a blackout. They were kept in the dark. So unless you go to some of the books and some of the documentaries that have been filmed since then and that are available out there, you're not going to hear anything about it unless you come on the Alex Jones show or some other talk radio show where somebody that's been working on the case is willing to appear.
Well, Colonel Roberts, I know you've probably covered a lot of this in your past appearances, but a lot of people are watching A Noble Life for the first time. I know for me it was a real primer into the detailed kind of overview because I missed a lot of that when it originally happened. But can you talk about some of the other threats to police officers? We had Don Browning, who's also in the film. There's a large section on Terrence Yankee, too, who I know you profiled, and the terrible treatment he was given. Can you talk about those threats? I mean, that's more than just prior knowledge. That's intimidating, torturing, killing police and other first responder witnesses who had relevant knowledge to this case.
Well, Don Browning is a good friend of mine. Don was a fantastic police officer. It was toward the end of his career. He was a K-9 sergeant at the time, and he was one of the first 2 in the building, from what I understand, him and Terry Akey, and looking for victims that were still alive. Trying to do the best they could, and Don saw damage inside the building that wasn't reported anyplace else. He saw damage in the back of the building, what they call the pit, where it went down 2 or 3 floors, inside what had been the parkade, where there were other explosives had detonated inside the building, and that's always left out. They don't want anybody to know that. They want everybody to think it's Lee Harvey McVeigh with a truck bomb, and that was it. When all that was a diversion. The actual explosives were inside the building. That's what brought down the major damage. And there, Don saw all this stuff, and he kept trying to tell people about it. And his own chain of command told him to shut up, don't talk about this stuff. And then, of course, the feds came and leaned on him and said, "You need to back off of this. You know, things could happen." I think they even told him that if he didn't shut up, that he could die. That sort of thing. They weren't that blatant with me. With me, they tapped my phone, they tapped my fax machine, they followed me, they tapped my office phones at the police department. And I knew all this stuff because I had gear that showed when, there was something on the line. I had fun with it. I had a great time with it myself. They didn't intimidate me. I just don't scare easy. After, I've been in the Marine Corps in Vietnam and all the stuff I've been through, I just didn't scare it, so it didn't bother me. My deal was, if you're going to do something to me, bring your own body bags and bring your lunch, because it's going to take a while. And that's just the way I am. So they didn't try that tact with me. But with Terry Yakey, on the other hand, that was a whole different deal. Terry, I never knew Terry. I never met him. I found out about all of this later on. Excuse me. But he was a sergeant on the police department in Oklahoma City, and I think he was the first one in the building. And he didn't like what he saw. I don't know exactly what he saw in the building, but I suspect he saw possibly some charges that did not go off, because one of the ladies, Jane Graham, who worked there, had gone to work, I think it was a day or two before that, and saw who she thought was Andrea Strassmeyer, and 2 other guys in the basement of the building, putting putty on the columns and stringing what she thought was telephone wire between them. But to me, it sounds like it was probably composition C4 and dead cord that they were stringing on the columns inside the building. And they were wearing GSA coveralls as camouflage. So later on, we find out that, not all the charges probably went off, and maybe Don Browning saw the damage and Terrence Yakey saw some of the charges. I don't know, but that's a theory I have. But whatever it was he saw, he kept trying to tell people about, and he was told by his own chain of command, stay off this, it's a federal deal, you don't want to do this, back off, just forget the whole thing, and he just wouldn't do it. And so he was accumulating evidence. He's getting statements from witnesses. He was talking to people that were survivors and things like that. His apartment was broken into. He was being followed around, and on one particular night, one particular afternoon, he was supposed to have dinner with a friend of his, and he called him up and he said, "Listen, I've got to run some stuff out to my mini storage in El Reno." And he said, when I get done with that, I'll come back and we'll go to dinner as soon as I shake these 2 feds that are following me. So for some reason, he thought that there were 2 federal agents following him, probably, in some sedan or something, wearing sunglasses. I don't know. But he was under the impression that they were following him. And he never came back. No one heard from him again. And he was found the next day near not far from the El Reno Federal Reformatory, in a field, out in the middle of a field. His car had been abandoned on a side road there. There was blood in the car. The car was locked up. They found a knife up where the heater would be, up under the dashboard. Why would you use a knife and then hide it unless you were doing something to somebody else? Because they wrote this whole thing up as a suicide when they found his body. When they found his body out in the middle of this field, we had to go through a bar ditch and a barbed wire fence, and they get out in the middle of this field. He had slash marks inside his wrists, slash marks inside both elbows, one on each side of his neck. He had rope burns around his neck, or ligature marks around his neck, and he had handcuff marks on his wrist. And then he was shot, and he'd been beaten and tortured, and he'd been shot from the upper side of his head down through the lower jaw. And there was hardly any powder burns. There was a contact wound with hardly any powder burns, which tells me it's probably a silencer or a sound suppressor, because that's where the powder would go instead.
But obviously not a suicide.
It was that, and who shoots themselves at a downward angle anyway? You know, you go on your chin, you go on your mouth, go through your head, but you don't get uncomfortable before you kill yourself. And I've got these diagrams, by the way, on my website. If somebody wants to go to Rifle Warrior, that's rifle as in gun, warrior as in soldier, all one word, riflewarrior.com, and scroll down to the Baker Street Irregulars, go to that and click on Terrence Yakey's case. And all those diagrams are there. The death certificate written up as a suicide and the whole bit. Interestingly enough, and it was a small caliber gun, probably a 32. Well, he was supposed to carry, I think, a Glock 40 or a 9mm. I can't remember which they had issued back in those days. But whatever it was, there was no gun found at the scene. The gun turns up later, and I'm not even sure if it was his service pistol or not. But the family wasn't even notified until later on, and when they were notified, did they send a police car over to get his mother? No. Did they send anybody over to do anything for the family? No. They, if you get the DVD, A Noble Lie, they interview Terrence Yakey's mother. They go into this case, and it's very interesting to see all of the different things that happened at that time down in the Oklahoma City area. But he was murdered. It was written up as a suicide, plain and simple. And there were so many others that had mysterious deaths around the Oklahoma City bombing and right afterwards. If you get on the internet and just type in Oklahoma City murders or Oklahoma City suicides or Oklahoma City bombing deaths, you can bring up a string of them. There's Dr. Chumley. He was the doctor that was on the scene that set up and with kind of a first aid station, was treating people there. And the ATF agents came up and wanted him to be treated, and told him that they were, they had been in this elevator and the elevator fell and all that. And they found out later the elevator never fell and they were never in it. They weren't even in the building when this thing went down. But he was telling everybody these guys weren't hurt and they were not in the building when this happened. Well, he was on a hunt, not long after that, he was on a hunting trip with some friends, and they went out, flew in his Cessna 210 airplane out to New Mexico, and they were flying back. Weather was clear, nothing wrong with anything, and the airplane, all of a sudden, over Shamrock, Texas, spirals straight down into the ground and kills them all. And there was nothing wrong with the airplane. It wasn't instrument conditions or anything. The FAA said, well, the only thing they could think is maybe he was the only one that knew how to fly and he had a heart attack and no one knew how to pull the airplane out of the dive. We'll never know because the wreckage was so bad. Yeah. But, bottom line is that there were so many after that, so many different witnesses, disappeared, killed, so on and so forth.
Sir, shifting gears, where does the larger story point? We know there's the whole Elohim City element with all these infiltrators, Andy Strassmeyer intelligence, super intelligence, whatever. The Jesse Trinidad document showed the SPLC